All right. Hello, Dr. Mantz. Here we are once
Hey,
again.
how are you, Jim? Yeah, I know. I'm excited. We took a nice week off, and now we're heading into another week. And so, how are things out there in Australia?
Yeah, really fantastic. It's great to catch up with you again after a couple weeks. Some news on our end. This is actually our last couple weeks in Australia. So we're coming
Oh,
back to the United States in mid-July if the flights work.
interesting. That'll be an interesting. I'd love to. I can't wait to talk to you after you've re-entered into our United States and see how it is for you.
Yeah, it's something else. We've talked about in the past how I was interviewing for a job and I've accepted that job and they want me to start in August. So it's
Congratulations.
kind of yeah, on the way back. And meanwhile, we're sitting here watching the surge in coronavirus cases, and maybe the protests are starting to settle a little bit. But either way, it looks a bit messy in America still. And
Hmm.
same old. It's like the easy life here in Australia. So there's some mixed feelings about coming back, but it's home.
Hmm.
Yeah. How are you,
Correct.
Michael?
I'm doing pretty good too. I mean, like we happen to be very fortunate where I live in Santa Barbara, even though there's been some areas like in LA that have struggled because I think people are, you keep people locked up in cages for too long and then you open them up and then of course people are just like, ah, and they just go. And I think there are some times where, especially when you're imbibing, I think a lot of places where bars and stuff like where alcohol is being imbibed, it's just natural. We're just a natural desire to want to socially connect, and to be isolated is so uncomfortable. So yeah, in your part of your brain that's saying, yeah, I want to socially distance, but then of course we take an intoxicant and we start to loosen things up, and then ultimately where those things kind of open up too quickly and all that stuff. And then, of course, there's been a lot of activities going on throughout all of the, variety of the states where I'm sure a lot of people have been, there's a lot of strong emotions going on. And that too can kind of hijack our centers of wanting to maybe do things one way, but when we're kind of getting either intoxicated or overly intensified emotions kind of take over, where we might do behaviors that are not healthy, either on a personal level or even on a collective level. And I think that's what we're probably seeing in mass, and that's leading to a lot of the effects that we're seeing in these surges area. But we happen to be in Santa Barbara, to be in a wonderful place. It's very chill and relaxed here. I've been very blessed in that regard. So yeah, and on your end and this end, it's been quite nice over here. So I've been quite fortunate.
Yeah, lucky to live in a nice place. You think about
Yes.
how crowds can be and how you can lose yourself in a crowd and start behaving in ways that you may not have been, in a smaller group or as an individual. And yeah,
Yep.
add months of self isolation and lockdown, and then add alcohol.
Yes.
Takes
That's a
very
cocktail in and
different.
of itself. And like one
Yeah.
thing I try to stress when I'm actually doing a lot of when I'm out on either social media is that it's not to is to say that what has been going on, the social unrest, the tearing apart of our social cohesion. A lot of people are not linking the two together, but they are absolutely heavily influenced by the kind of uncoordinated, often confusing, and often a lot of noise in what we should and shouldn't be doing. That plays a large part and has influenced, I think, a lot of the issues now that we're seeing. That the one form, the isolation and the difficulty to have face-to-face kind of communication, being able to look at each other's eyes and mouths and everything else, that certainly there's certain reasons for doing that, but there's also side effects that creates. And I think this is one of the side effects that we're starting to see. It's been heavily influenced by this kind of tearing apart of the social fabric of our country in that regards, because of all this, because we are such a diverse and large country, and oftentimes that diversity is often a strength. But when we shut down some of these very important communication channels, especially the nonverbal ones of tonality, body language, hand gesturing, all that stuff, when that's lost, and even in proximity, when that's lost, then our diversity can sometimes become an issue. In that it kind of, because we need all those channels to be open so that we don't miscommunicate. It's even the differences between gender. Like oftentimes when I'm working with couples who are struggling to communicate, the one thing I'm like saying is like, you have to stop texting each other. Like that's like first and foremost. I would think one of a general rule: don't text, because you don't get the tone, you don't get all the other nonverbal communications, and you're going to wind up misinterpreting what each other says. So that's one of the first general rules. Texting is just used for just general stuff like, hey, I just need this, and at the grocery store, but not to have conversations on that way, which is unfortunately how most of us are doing it, especially on social media platforms.
Yeah, when I get in those with my wife, it's like not a good not a good route to go down, where we're having arguments over WhatsApp or something like that. It's like, yeah, this is just amplifying and not going in the right way. And you know, one of the things I'd like to talk about you today a bit is like our own personal update on this idea between unplugging versus engaging more in social media, given what's going on today. And before we get into that, I just wanted to make the remark that, you know, not only is it that we've been isolated and, you know, we've been missing these, you know, nonverbal cues and, you know, the togetherness, it's also on top of that, we're feeding our brains with very biased information, like biased in the sense that it's newsworthy. And I've found, you know, even I've reduced my news consumption a lot, but I found that I'm seeing some of the more extreme reactions to the public health measures that are probably views that are held by very few people, but they seem to be overrepresented. Like people who, you know, they're referring to conspiracy theories as like reasons why not to wear masks.
Yes.
And that, to me, just watching that, you know, maybe I see a headline or I read an article, I struggle with this idea of like, really, what's the percentage of people who really are taking it that far? It's probably pretty small, but it's being presented front and center, and it's getting this like emotional rise out of me. And so I think we're all like, it's like we're alone in these rooms getting that drilled in our heads, and then we come out all like angry and righteous.
The fun of it. Well, you know, this comes into your area of expertise, obviously, the machine learning, the AIs, what they're kind of selecting for your feeds, because they're optimizing not for necessarily truth and peacefulness. They're optimizing to kind of hijack your emotional system, because they know that's going to be likely to get you engaged and to keep you engaged far beyond than you would normally would. It's like, you know, some of the strategies they use in casinos to get people to stay in the casino. They're not out for your well-being. They're out to kind of get you to stay there. And so these AI systems that they've kind of like built into there to kind of, you know, attract you in those ways. It's not accident, obviously, that they've been giving these things that ding you in these probably most likely highly really not like large groups, if we actually were to look at the whole population. But to you, because we're all isolated, it seems like it's all over the place, because that's all you're being exposed to when you interact with these areas.
It's like that old news adage, if it bleeds, it leads.
Yes.
But then take that and build an algorithm that, you know, is detecting that it's actually should lead because people interact with it more. But then the reasoning with that interaction, it's, you know, more plugged into anger centers or like, you know, sort of extreme emotions that you know like you wouldn't necessarily want to amplify. And you see that now with a lot of whether it's the ad boycotts on Facebook and other social media, or just general upsetness that some of these like products are amplifying anger and hate. So
yeah,
you know, when I was at Facebook, we worked on trying to mitigate that. You know, that there were people there who were really like looking at the algorithm and saying like, hey, really what the algorithm's trying to do is, you know, keep people on Facebook. That's, you know, there's some truth to that. It is a business. It's not on purpose trying to amplify these emotions. I don't think anyone is like, you know, there's not a sinister person trying to diabolically like, hey, let's throw more anger in there. It's kind of, it becomes a side effect. And that it's unwanted, it's a harm. And so there are teams there, and I was on one of them that, you know, purposely set out to mitigate the harms in these products. And then the question that people can ask, and rightfully so, is how empowered are these teams? Are they doing a good job? You know, are there harms from these products? And if so, like, what are the right things to do about that?
Yeah.
So well, so let's talk about, you know, this is a kind of interesting topic, is a little bit of our like personal journey with this.
Sure.
So in the last couple weeks, I guess it's been 3 weeks now, I've decided to unplug from
Mm.
Facebook and Twitter specifically. I was spending a lot of time on there reading news, maybe writing some posts, and I did that for reasons. I was just feeling a little bit, getting a little bit upset reading this stuff, and I just wanted to take a break. I've talked about that before, and I think you've
Mm.
gone the other way, where you're starting to build more of a presence on Twitter and engaging more. And I thought it'd be like a really interesting conversation to you see the counterbalance between the decision, to like engage during this time, and like, how you found that been, and then I could talk a little bit more about like what it's meant to unplug and how I found that been. So
Sure.
yeah, maybe to kick off, tell us a little bit about your experience in the last few weeks.
Yeah, I never was like when I ever heard the idea of Twitter, because that's where I've been predominantly on now, social media wise, is that I was like, yeah, so when anyone explains it to you at first and you've never been on it, yeah, so what you do is you kind of type these things out and you send it out and then you listen to other people. So you're basically texting each other, right? Well, yeah, but yeah, you could attach all these things and it's like, how is that interesting? I was like, you don't get it, right? So you get on there and I still looked at it and it was just like, it just seemed like a lot of noise. And so it never interested me because I signed up on 2016, but I rarely went on it and I just didn't see the point. And to be quite honest with you, with most of the social media platforms, I just felt like a lot of it was very superficial and it didn't get me. So I'm a very kinesthetic person. I sense things and whether that would be something I would want to do. And it just never called to me. Then when COVID hit and I started noticing, and I've been tracking a lot of different trends that have been going on culturally in the United States. And I started getting very interested in the intellectual dark web and like, Jordan Peterson, Eric Weinstein, Brett Weinstein, Gad Saad, a lot of different people that were kind of representing out there and talking about this sort of cultural movement that started in what seems to be have really kind of found a home in a lot of the universities. Jordan Peterson was the one who kind of was very big on where he drew his like a lot of both controversy and also what drove him into the spotlight was his first saying that he was against this proposition that was against what how he described it as compelled speech. Was the first time that Canada was trying to force a person to use a particular pronoun otherwise for a particular punishment. I'm not an expert on this, but I'm just sort of summarizing. So I thought that was pretty interesting, and by following that thread out and going through, I started to notice that I've been following this for about 2 to 3 years, and then once the COVID hit. I was just going on to Twitter, and then I started noticing the protests, and then started to break out into these sort of riots, and then also hearing from my patients different things that were starting to come up. So I felt more moved to go on to that space. And when I first went onto Twitter, I was like, man, this is like a high school locker room. It was like, whoa, like people are just like dinging one each other and going back and forth, and so. I was trying to figure out, like, is there a way to use this?
I've heard it described by someone as like, you go on Twitter, it's like opening up a garbage can and seeing rats and cockroaches fighting each other.
There is a deep there's a deep truth in that point.
But there's
and so
also
that's how
that's a really like extreme way of putting it, right?
But I like it though. It's nice. Good. It's a nice little image. But so I went on there and I'm trying to get a feel for it. And then sometimes of course you get into those arguments with people. And then like I noticed like even if I felt like I was right, I would be waiting for their reply the next day and I'm like not feeling good. I'm like waiting because I know that some people are trolling and they're gonna ding you with something. And I was like, it just didn't feel right. But there was still a part of me that felt like there's a way you can use Twitter as a powerful tool, especially if you have something really helpful to say. And I felt, given my skills as a psychiatrist, given that I've worked with many people who are sharing some of these ideas that have been kind of promulgated now out that are causing, I think, a lot of damage to our social fabric, that I felt I had something to say and how to say it in a way that was balanced and healthy, and how to not get always caught into these little squabbles with people, and so how to rise above that. And so I it was really on my profile where I said I wanted to actually heal the red and the blue, try to see if I could heal those two camps, because they really are, the polarization has just been tremendous.
Yeah.
So I was like, well, rather than trying to like be seen as one side or the other, can I almost take a therapeutic position like I do when I'm working with couples or when I'm working with families? And that's how I kind of, once I made that shift, it shifted the idea of the tool for me. And now I see Twitter as kind of like a bunch of neurons, and how they're all communicating with each other, and they all have like different network groups. So you can see that one's more the conservative snarky group that they like to be all sarcastic, and then you have the liberal snarky group over here. And then you have the more intellectual, like the doctors talking to each other about the different ways that COVID are doing this and that. And then you have this one and that one. So you can kind of then curate who you follow, and then be careful of following just the feed, because obviously that's going to be driven by ways to just keep you on board and get you into more of an obsessive compulsive. So I generally try to not go too much on the feed and go mostly to those who I'm following, and then see who they follow, and then just look at their profiles and be able to kind of build a certain like strong people that are using it, where I feel like they're not trying to, it's like the same thing you would do with news. If they're trying to over dramatize, if they're trying to instill a lot of rage and fear inside of you, that's not the type of person I want to be able to spend my attention on. And so I would just do that. And by doing that and then engaging people, and what I noticed is there's also a lot of things, a lot of social behaviors that you would do, say, together, that you're not doing on Twitter, like using the other person's name when they have it. So I'll oftentimes, when I'm tweeting back to somebody, I'll use their name, because I want to get like that, the more humanistic quality. And by doing that, it's been really, I found it to be very beneficial, and and I'm still learning it. But again, I found the overall, it switched for me from being more that compulsive to being, and just feeling kind of a little bit icky and tired and burned out. Like I check myself at the end of my session with Twitter, is like, how do I feel?
Yeah.
What's it like? Am I feeling all bound up and all that stuff? Or do I feel like, oh, that was actually time well spent? And if it's the bound up type of, what was making that like that? And can I change? Was it too much time? Or was it just the way I was engaging in it? And asking these sort of questions and then really reflecting on that was helpful to kind of continue to tool myself in a way to use this as a helpful tool rather than the other way around.
And so you're finding, I guess you're finding on balance, you're finding it to be time well spent. Mm-hmm. And then you're also learning from the feeling. So like if something feels like a little off, maybe you'll behave differently.
Correct. And
how you read things, or
And like I said, and I think it's absolutely essential that you take at least one full day off per week, because it does have an addictive quality. And that's why a lot of people have to even have apps that shut it off for them. There's a reason for that, because it's built that way. So having a clear cutoff time of not 2 hours before sleep, no more tweeting, that kind of stuff. And then something along the lines of, taking at least one day off. Everyone will have to find their own way. But then, you want to make sure that your sleep is not being intruded upon, and that you yourself are not getting too compulsive, and that you give yourself at least a day, or you have to unplug. Your tweeting will be better if you're looking to actually gain followers. If you take a day off, it allows your non-conscious mind to kind of process it all, and gives your conscious mind a break from that, and you'll come back refreshed and more likely to not get too caught up in rigid styles of behaving and tweeting.
So I can think of a few things that you've mentioned, like, what you're personally using Twitter for, and I thought I'd run those by you and like kind of get your comments on them. So the three are marketing, engaging in a public or intellectual conversation, and then also having discussions on an individual level and bringing some healing, perhaps, in those discussions. So like, kick it off on like, I guess a lot of people use Twitter, and I don't mean this in like a pejorative way, but like as a marketing tool. Absolutely. And you certainly, like, as you're pretty unique, I think, as a psychiatrist. You've made your career and profession about a lot of holistic and integrative medicine that very few people go down that route, but it also could be of enormous benefit. So in that sense, maybe Twitter for you is a way to like, build more awareness about what you've learned and spread some knowledge there. So it seems like as part of what you're interested in, kind
Yes.
of like building a following. Although, would you say that that's like the primary focus right now? Because it also seems like there's this big public discussion happening around all of the kind of pandemic and social issues. And it seems like you're maybe more engaged in that than the first right now. Is that a fair
Correct,
thing
and
to say?
absolutely, and like you were just saying, it depends on what your ultimate motive is, and yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna, there is a sense of wanting to get a following, but if that's your first, there's whenever anything that you do, and this is just an overall point, not just here, you're gonna have multiple motivations for it. Some of them are going to be more altruistic. Some of them are going to be more selfish. I mean, that's just called being a human being. And we all have to recognize that. And that it's oftentimes when we're doing things, it's not just one motivator leading it. So you want to check in from time to time because it's natural. Like, oh, they're following me. Oh, they liked me or retweeted me. You're going to get a little ding. It's called being a human being. And, let's be honest here. So that being said, you also have to keep that in check because the issue is, and I could feel it because I can sense it, and it was happening a little bit, and that's why I have other people, like a couple of the people who did start to follow me. I said, hey, by the way, if I start going off balance, please call me out on it. Please call me out because you could see that even the best of us that's gonna happen to us too. So you want to put fail safes in, and I have that with my wife, and I have that with other people around me. Like, hey, just make sure I don't go too far into trying to play to your followers and try to build a certain kind of echo chamber, which is not what I want to do. In fact, I want as diverse of a following as possible so that we can actually have open dialogue. And what I'm driven to do is to try to teach people how to listen to each other, how to be able to have a dialogue without feeling getting ultimately too defensive so that we shut down and we don't have this conversation, because there are difficult conversations that need to be had, and we're not taught the tools in general how to have those conversations. And now more than ever, when things have become much more the information flow is much more rapid, the polarization is much more intense, it's making it much more difficult to have dialogue. So where I'm driven to, and ultimately where I keep feeling, and it's a feeling of openness, it's not like this sort of, the compulsive part's like the part that maybe wants, oh, I want this, I want more of that. And then I feel that part. And then I feel the other part where it's like, no, when I write it like this, it actually is more inclusive. It brings people together. And that has a much more just balanced and whole feeling. And it's not driven like this, like, oh, I have to do that. So that tuning in and checking in with the body has been critically important. And yeah, if followers is your number one, if you're doing a pure business, I get it. But if you're trying to do, like, say in my case, where I'm trying to actually, bring people together and help, that's a dangerous issue. And it's something that you want fail safes around. You can't just depend on yourself for that. And when people talk to you that you trust, make sure you're open and listen to them. So that's kind of what I've installed for myself to kind of keep a buffer system.
Yeah. I'm starting a job at a pretty big tech company in a month. And,
Mm-hmm.
I've worked in 10 years in that. And there's part of me that is trying not to bring all of my past and everything I know about the conditions. You just not that any particular company is good or bad. It's just there's just certain things that go with working in an office politics, and bringing a sense of innocence and beginner's mind to this new job,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm looking at the positive. Now I say that because this idea of having healthy dialogue on the internet. There's just a part of me that goes okay, you're gonna go in the cave with the dragon unarmed. It's just gonna eat you alive.
So, well, no, it's perfect that you brought that up. So the thing is, I'm in a unique position because there's not many psychiatrists that also do psychotherapy. So I've been trained in over 4 different psychotherapies and psychodynamics and mindfulness-based psychotherapies. So there's techniques that you use that when someone starts to troll you and starts and bashing. First of all, if they're completely trolling, that's one thing, and then why bother? But there's other people who they're kind of testing you with a little test, and you could generally start to feel the difference between the two types. And that one is another one I do want to engage in. And I've often had people where I'll go into different parts of different areas, and just a person will sort of kind of attack you, and then I'll show by showing all right, when someone does that, attacking not you but your tweet, and that's a big distinction. And that's a big one, is learning not to identify with what you're tweeting out, and actually that it's just words that just came out of your hands and you put it on there. That's what it is. And the more you can disidentify with it, the more likely you can be less likely to be defensive. And then how did it, like, oh, so what's the evidence of what you just said? And be open to it. I'm not just trying to be a snarky jerk to try to win something. I'm really trying to show people who might look at that from their own perspective, and also the person I'm dialoguing with, just like I would do in therapy, to kind of, you know, open up the space like that. And yeah, it requires a lot of tools and a lot of knowledge, and working with people. Like I've, you know, in my line of work, I have people who, you know, yell at you and, you know, project all kinds of anger and rage, and all kinds of stuff is thrown at your way. So I've had over 10 years of experience with that. And so what I'm trying to do is showcase that, because that's what's happening to a lot of people out there. And how do you handle that and actually create what could be a major conflict into something that becomes a dialogue, and actually shows other people as a model what you can do in those situations to go from one place and shift it to a place where actually healing can happen.
Yeah, I give you a lot of credit for that. And it's, yeah, I think it's a very laudable thing. And I think it can make a difference because you're talking to people at the end of the day. It is a person to person thing. I guess you know, one question that comes up, and this is kind of getting back to my own unplugging. Like I found the, you know, I was compelled, or just throughout the day, I'd be checking social media like 20 times a day, 25 times a day. And it was like less, you know, active behavior. It was just more of like, oh, I have a minute and an urge, and I would just kind of scroll through a feed. How have you been able to keep the, you know, your use of it intentional? Like, do you limit it a certain amount of time? Do you just like have these conversations, but like, you know, you're also in the mix, you're kind of caught in this dopamine cycle too, and like, well, that just comes with the territory. Just kind of curious, like how you're managing your relationship with Twitter in a way that you're not also getting pulled into like this sort of you know, like addictive side of
Correct.
checking it all the time.
Yeah, great question. And so, you know, again, it's not like I'm doing it perfectly. Do I fall into that trap? And I sometimes will go past my time that I set before bedtime, and I just want to do this one tweet, because you get kind of caught into. Does this happen? Of course it does. We're not here to be perfect. And what I notice is then what's the consequences? The next day I feel tired, or next day or say I try to, like, you know, if I was going to get on Twitter, I'll do it for like maybe like a half hour or something like that before, you know, and still keep it at least an hour or an hour and a half away from whenever I see a patient. It has to be at least an hour, because I need a full hour just to kind of, I'm not going to bring that into it would be unfair to them. So it's really having your values and using those as compasses to guide you, using your body to guide you when you do kind of, it's not like you chastise yourself for breaking the rules, just listen to your body. So oftentimes I'll do that. And then, you know, after work, I like to do it after work. Oftentimes once I'm done with patients, I've closed it all up, give myself like a nice little time where I can do that. And then also, you know, balancing that without also not being on Twitter and then reneging on my relationships, but really engaging on that too. So I think by having clarity of what it is that you value, having clarity as to what you're looking to accomplish on there. Is it just to connect? Is it just to, you know, there is a healthy part where, you know, there's a lot of, you know, couples where there may be a person who's more sarcastic than the other, and they used to get it from their friendships, and they can't do that anymore. So maybe you do go on there to just be a sarcastic bastard and enjoy that just for what it's worth, but, you know, not get to make it more lightly kind of comedic kind of thing for yourself. And it's a way of expressing that part of yourself. Great. Then that, you know that, but then don't get lost in all the other stuff. And also notice the biggest distinction that I can tell for people is to know the difference between when you're engaging in something and when you're being compelled in your body. And it's felt. It's like there's a tightness, there's a push. And by distinguishing that, when you feel your compulsive signature, as opposed to just one in which you're just being engaged and it's an enjoyable experience, that distinction is a big one to get, and know when one is hitting the other. And I think I call it the sensational navigation system. By developing this capacity, you'll be able to in real time be able to say, okay, it's time to shut this off. Oh, okay. You just get better at just checking in sensing and be like, okay, I notice I'm getting pulled into this too much. Let me take a break. And the more you do that, the more, and you may say, but your brain might say, but, no, you got to finish that. And I'm like, what I do, and I've done with my patients, like when that happens, be like saying, what do you want more? To strengthen that compulsion, or do you want to strengthen your freedom? Because that's your choice in that point. If you decide to go through it, that's fine. It's no moral judgment. But just know when you did that, you've now lost a little bit more of your freedom and you've strengthened your compulsive patterns. But if you've done the opposite, if you've disengaged, you've made it less and less likely to get enticed by that kind of compulsivity.
Yeah. I want to put a footnote for a future conversation that we can have, which goes to the design of conversations on these products. So, Facebook and Twitter, this is something that is an active area of interest in product design. Is like, okay, how can you improve the quality of public conversation in some way? Whether that remove some of the like more clear harms, like when there's hate speech or just like abusive behavior, or even like the more subtle ones, you just like raise a level of quality where it feels like a healthy conversation. And you can see Twitter doing some of these things with the experiments of the features they have, like making it so that only your followers could reply, or just turning off replies to a tweet, where they've seen that sometimes, at least for like, more known public figures, they'll say something and they just get barraged by trolls who like just come and leave all of these really like disparaging and critical and not meant to be helpful remarks in the feed below.
Correct.
So there's an interesting awareness within these companies that there's something about the dialogue and the way like the software has been built that it at times channels itself into like less wholesome experience than it could be.
Correct.
Maybe a future conversation we can talk about with your experience with Twitter, like what do you personally find works or doesn't in these types of dialogues? But
I would love that. We'll table that.
Yeah. And so just on the other side, let's talk about.
Yeah, I'd like to know, well, before we go to that, I would like to know how it's been, though. We didn't really explore as much for you because you were engaged. It was causing you some distress. And then there was obviously an inner wisdom that called you to really unplug. And a lot of people would struggle to do probably what you have done. I'd just like to just kind of touch base on that part.
Yeah, exactly. That's where I was going to. Right. So it's been a few weeks and it has momentum. So it's not like I'm still, I'm still locked out of my own Facebook and Twitter accounts with passwords that I don't know. I deleted the apps. I put in a Chrome extension on my web browser. So if I try to navigate to one of the sites, it won't even load, which is really annoying. Like I use Facebook to log into Zoom and like I have to like undo it and put it on just to even like start up my Zoom. So I think these things have been pretty effective in taking them out of my day. And I'm still at a place where I feel very grateful for the time and energy that I have back. And I'm putting it into more intentional reading online. So for instance, like I found things basically to fill the time. So like, for instance, I found an app called STOOP. And what STOOP does is it lets you sign up for newsletters around the web, and it gives you your own email, and it's like a little app for consuming newsletters. Like back in the day, people had RSS readers. This is kind of along the same lines, and you can subscribe to like a dozen newsletters and read that. And instead of just reading a feed where you don't really know what's going to come up, you at least have made the intention to subscribing to just a select few of newsletters, and they're topical. So there are things that like you're interested in learning more about. And so I found, shifting time away from who knows what you're going to see on Twitter, like what's someone angry about at that moment, to a little bit more of, hey, here's a piece on tech strategy, or here's a piece on what's happening in the market, or, I found that to be time that I'm, for now, having made that substitution, like proud of. Like I feel good about like that type of consumption.
Yeah, and what has helped you? Because obviously you just mentioned one of the possibilities that you had to make certain like roundabout maneuvers where you could see maybe someone else, they may say like, you know what, screw this, and then they take the extension off. You know, what do you think has helped you to continue on and do that? Is there something that's been guiding you when you feel like, and also that's one, and then number two would be, have you felt any moments where it's like almost like a craving to go back, and then you kind of held yourself from not actually going into the Twitterverse again?
Yeah, I think those are good questions. You know, there's a specific craving that I get. It's just like, hey, I want some information. And probably the real answer is, while I made some choices to turn off a couple products where I was spending more time, it's really just shifted to others. So I noticed that I just shifted to Reddit. And Reddit was pretty good because I was intentional about which subreddits I subscribed to. So I was getting pretty topical stuff. But then I also found that I started to do that through the day, and I'm just scrolling through a feed there. It's like, oh no, okay, add that to the list. So now that's on the blog.
Like a whack-a-mole thing, right?
Yeah,
Boom, boom.
And then like YouTube is another one that can kind of get you, you know? And especially I give myself some time, like, you know, later in the day where it's like, I don't have another thing to do. And I just let the YouTube explore algorithm take me down these rabbit holes. And, you know, we've talked a lot about like the feelings that arise. I don't get as much of that like indignation kind of feeling that's the one that I really turned me off about, you know, the sort of the zeitgeist now. I just feel like it's kind of, you know, it's just like really, you know, I watch surfing videos or like videos of, you know, boats crashing or, you know, like some guys playing guitar, like, you know, just like different, like harmless things. Like I'm not going down like the conspiracy path that you can get led down on YouTube.
Sure can. Trust me, I have a lot of patience where I'm hearing a lot of interesting stuff.
Like that. So for now it's okay. And I haven't really had yet the like call back into these things. I don't think I'm in the camp of like, hey, I'm off of these forever, and like I would recommend the same for everyone. And I definitely agree that you can do a lot of good, and there's a lot of the aspect of just like socializing, both like public, like global intellectual conversations happening on these platforms, but just even like your own community. You know, like there's a product like Facebook filled with, you know, all of your acquaintances, and you can kind of keep in touch with them without having to pick up a phone. And sometimes, you know, you're not going to pick up a phone or pick up a Zoom call with all of these people, but it's nice to see that someone moved to a new city or like had some life event, and you can kind of wish them well from afar. So it's like, I see that there's those goods that I'm missing out for now. And I haven't answered the question yet of, for when I do go back, you know, how will the behavior be different? How can I keep it less, you know, I guess like it comes down to, there's almost like a crux in it. I would like to have less of the feed behavior where I'm opening the app multiple times a day and I just want that kind of, is there anything new here? Or like maybe I left a post, you know, who commented, who engaged with the post. Less of that, like 30 times a day, and more of just like, you know, what if I gave myself 20 or 30 minutes, just went through things once, you know, wrote some message, interacted with some people, and then that was it. So if I can find ways to use, you know, for my own personal use, use the product in the kind of latter category, I think that would be like a good, healthy compromise. But I just don't know if I can, actually.
Yeah, I see some parallels where, you know, oftentimes you hear people how to use email more effectively. So you're not just checking it all day long, but that you do it in batches so that you are actually more productive that way than constantly compulsively answering every little email as it comes dribbling down the way, you know, when you're just sort of going away like that. So I see some potential parallels in that and how one manages that to be more productive and efficient, and how you could do that in the different, you know, social media platforms.
Yeah, I think that's a big question too with there's email, and then there are other products like Slack, or the other like, different like workplace products where you're on a team and people are using these instant messages to quickly communicate, and then the threads come up, and you know, you want to be influential in the team, and like a lot of people feel the pull not to miss weighing in on all of those threads. Now, suddenly they're always on, you know, like as we move around from conventional work days and we move away from being, you know, physically in an office, even before the pandemic, you would find that people were active in these threads, you know, nights, weekends. There's really very few sacred times. And how you know, like it's kind of a little bit slightly different, you know, aspect of the same phenomena. How can you stay healthily engaged and be part of this workforce as the trend moves to this more always on type of, even if it's not an expectation, but even just like a personal pull, you know, maybe really into your work, you know, and maybe, you know, you're at a point in your life where you want to advance your career, and you can, because you don't have other responsibilities, but then suddenly it's Saturday night at, you know, 9 o'clock and you're out with your buddies somewhere and you're, you know, you see almost everyone on their phones and they're, you know, they're doing work. You know, this is like, you know, really
the boundaries have been destroyed.
Yeah, completely eroded. So yeah, I think those are kind of good. It's a very astute observation that they're very related things. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I, you know, like I was just saying, for what, you know, I've been getting that from a lot of my patients, to be quite honest with you, because everyone thought like, oh, great, we're all working at home. This is fantastic. But then no one knows when who you're working with. And so they've been, especially if you're in a particular, I think the organizations too are going to have to realize that this requires different ways in which management is done, and maybe requires kind of restructuring how that's done, because what a lot has been happening is kind of what you were alluding to, is that the people are working like straight through. They have no lunches because no one knows when you're taking a lunch. So you're getting, especially if you're an international company and you're getting different people from different time zones, and that when you were in a kind of physical office, you know, people knew that you were working with somebody or you're seeing someone in a meeting, but now you're just getting all these messages and you have to answer all these things. So a lot of my clients, especially my executive clients, have been like really struggling with being able to keep a balance once we shifted from home. And so I think that's a whole new other kind of, we can go down that rabbit hole at another time as well. But that's another one where I've been working with a lot of clients on how to establish appropriate boundaries and how to work through that appropriately.
Yeah. It's, you know, a positive way out that I've seen, and it's really important. This comes from leadership. So like, you know, people at pretty high managerial levels, is when they make a point of setting boundaries by sending out like an email or like some kind of messaging to their own, you know, team or their own organization. Hey, you know, here are my boundaries. You know, I will work from 9 to 6, and between 6 and 9, I'm not going to be off of this completely because I do this and this and this. And typically I won't be available on, you know, these hours on weekends, but then maybe, you know, and by doing that, you know, to me, I've seen it to be effective because it signals that, you know, even people who are, you know, up the hierarchy are okaying that. Correct. And then, you know, they're also they are setting boundaries. And so,
correct.
I don't know. Personally, I've been able to do that, I think. But there's still also the side of me that's like, hey, you know, if I take these boundaries because I have a family, am I like sacrificing some of my career advancement? Like, what does that mean? So I think it could be confusing for a lot of people.
Yeah, and I think what you're highlighting too is how we can get too myopic just with career development, and also recognizing that it's actually life development that we're looking to have, and well-being, and the balancing of those things, and also the understanding of what it is that really drives meaning in your life, and aligning your behaviors with that. Because if we get too kind of caught up in a kind of compulsive drive to do whatever in your business, and that can obviously lead you to a lot of imbalances, hurt your relationships, which, you know, we see oftentimes, especially if you are moving up the ladder and more responsibilities are being dumped on you, and you're kind of losing, like maybe your health starts to tank or your relationships start to tank. And then what are you left with when you're 60 years old and you're divorced and you're like 2 steps away of having a heart attack? I mean, is that how you want to be at the end of this, you know, when you're nearing the end of your life? I mean, so these are the questions that I think people really have to explore. now, because the pressures, I think, are very, very high. And so I think these are are really good questions that we can continue to explore these balances. And another thing I'd like to highlight, what you brought up when executives, how important that is because of how important modeling is. It's one of the things why we also look at like celebrities and stuff like that when they're on there, because there's this powerful modeling effect that we have where we learn best, especially to those people who we maybe have higher levels of status in many different ways, whether intellectual status, social status, or financial status, that they have power in what they say and how they and what their behaviors are. So by doing that, and I encourage a lot of executives to do that, not only will it have a power to maybe model that for other people, but it will make your company overall better. Because if you don't rest, most of our work, our non-conscious mind is actually more powerful than our conscious mind. And if you don't give it a chance to process all that information while you're doing other things like playing and being with family, you're gonna dull yourself out. You're gonna burn out, and it's not gonna your products and innovation, your creativity is gonna tank.
Yeah, for someone looking forward to jumping back into that pool, I'm getting burned out just thinking about it. So let's shift topics and maybe just jam on this for maybe not too much longer. So I guess we're
okay.
a few minutes into the call now. And this is this idea between how we spend our time and whether it's active or passive creative behavior. So what I mean by that is, so we have a lot of entertainment and a lot of it's passive where we consume. So whether we're reading the internet, even reading books, we're watching television, we're watching movies, we're spectating in sports, and there's all the sort of passive things. And there's
Yes.
there's obviously like a lot of beauty in that. And we, we love these things. But then there's also this other side, these opportunities to be more actively participant in them. We can play sports instead of watching. We can, heaven forbid, write books or essays instead of reading books. We can make our own podcasts. Like that's a thing now. You don't have to be a famous television celebrity to just take a few minutes a week and try to make an interesting conversation. And yet it seems hard. So I guess like a couple things to throw over the Pacific Ocean to you. Is first like the distinctions in like just like mental health between these two things, right? Like what does creativity do for improving mental health? And then why is it so easy to stream Netflix, but like just like really hard as hell to make a podcast or like shoot your own film or create these things? Like it seems like a barrier, right?
Well, yeah, there's always an activation energy to get things going, especially if you're not healthy. I mean, that's a lot of times where a lot of us are out of balance. I say the biggest factor, and I'll come back to this, and I'm not going to go into a huge detail diatribe on this whole thing, but it's sleep. If your sleep sucks, you're going to be more likely to want to do passive behaviors. You're just not going to have the oomph unless someone's forcing you because of some deadline. It's hard to have that spark to initiate a kind of active behavior, whether, as you were kind of saying before, whether it's writing something, creating an article, creating a website, doing something artistic like painting itself, or whatever else you might want to do. So that would be first and foremost. So if you're feeling that, if you're tired, the other thing with sleep is also REM sleep. So if you were, we should be sleeping, most of us, around 7 to 9 hours is the general kind of guidelines for most people. If you cut that just by like an hour or two, you're going to lose most of your REM sleep. REM sleep, when you're dreaming, is where a lot of the creativity is generated from, new ideas are generated from. So if you're cutting into your REM sleep, 60 to 90% of your REM sleep happens within the last third of the night. So if you cut into that, you're cutting like even an hour, you're cutting in a vast amount of your REM sleep, which is going to cut your creativity. It's also going to cut your ability to want to do things. You're more likely, when you don't sleep well, it's like, how inspired do you feel like doing new things or doing something very active as opposed to just having things be passive to you? So I would say those are a couple things. If you're healthy, if you're sleeping well, those would be more likely to engage. To know what is that makes meaning in your life, to know what your values are, is really helpful, because then you're more likely when you are about to do something, if a part of you is like, I don't really want to do it, but you've aligned yourself with those values and you know it and you feel it. It's not just that you know it cognitively, you know it because you've done it enough times that that's what brings meaning in your life. Like when I am being creative by, thinking of new ideas about how to help heal the mind, like that drives me. Like if I'm doing that and I connect to that, then even when I'm like, I'm watching a Netflix and you know how it goes into the next episode and you're like, all right, I'm just going to let it slip through. No, that part of me will kind of kick in. I sense my body like, yeah, I've had enough here. I'm a little bit kind of getting that kind of, it's almost like you're getting like kind of like yucky tiredness feeling. I'll be like, no, it's time to change it up and let's get up and going. The other kind of just going with some pointers, I'd say be active first before you decide to be passive. So right out the gate, one of the things I found and what I suggest to a lot of my patients is to be active right off the bat. Like get outside, go out in the sun, go for a walk, play some music. One thing I've been doing with on my Twitter feed, I'm playing with these new ideas like mind health tip. And now as I'm getting to figure it out, I should hashtag that so it categorizes it. But one of the mind health tips is to listen to at least one song that either you feel like inspired by or you get into a little bit of a groove in, and just do one and move your body to it a little bit if you can for extra bonus points. And then I post out one of my videos, kind of like modeling, and just like you were talking about, it's another way of modeling. Like, here's a psychiatrist who's listening to the song and that was helpful for them. So that kind of stuff. So getting active right off the bat. And oftentimes what you see that in a lot of my clients who are executives and successful, they'll do their reading up front, like active reading right in the beginning of the day before they go to work. They do their exercise maybe before, or at least some of their exercise. And then mixing up and having definitive times when you're active and establishing those moments for yourself. And I think those are ways to kind of do it, because it's much more easier, obviously, to slide into passive activity. So I would have some certain times that you dedicate to your active expressions.
Yeah, sounds like mornings are a valuable time for that. You're not like exhausted from the end of a work day, and you might have intention to go to the gym, but unless it's like a pretty affirmed habit, it's hard to do if you're tired out and you still have to do a ton of things. Yeah, how could you get started? Say it's like people have an aspiration to pick up like a new type of active activity. Are there like tips that you have to just start things new? And then related to that, how does like the support of people around you impact that? Because I think like for some of these things, like, I would love to be a musician, but I'm actually pretty bad at it, and like the last thing I'd ever wanted, people to hear it, and so like I'm not, forget it, it's too hard. I'm not even like try.
Sure.
So yeah, just any tips on that piece?
Yeah, I think what you just said, it was a great example. So let's say you just wanted to all of a sudden start playing the guitar, and maybe it's just difficult for you. So and also you're a husband and a parent, and so you have these other roles, and it could be stressful in the house. So obviously, if your wife is kind of doing this right, and she sees you sort of making all kinds of noise on the guitar, it might lead itself to certain conflict. So of course, you would want to do is be able to have that conversation, like, hey, I've been really inspired. Is there anything that inspires you too? And then you support each other on that kind of end. Like, yeah, I just like to try out, like, playing the guitar a little bit, and you may have that conversation, and then you can get it understanding, like I just said, what would inspire them, and then you can maybe cover for each other for those moments, and then that moments, and so then when they'll be more prepared when they're hearing kind of like when the dogs are barking because you're playing the guitar, that's okay. It's okay, what's understood. So you may have to have that kind of conversation in as you were alluding to in relationship. Now, as it gets started, is to find that which is that generates a genuine interest, not because it's kind of something you feel like you should do, but something that you really feel like it has a little bit of a spark in there that you would like to explore. Now, not all of those sparks are going to lead to something that you do long term or something like that, but just start following those little sparks and see where they take you. Some of them will be short, Some of them will be a little bit longer, but the more you follow your interest, and it's felt in the body, the more you'll notice that actually creates more and more things in which you can become more easily actively engaged without feeling like you need to kind of push yourself into it, but you become more and more pulled by these different activities. And I think that's a great way to just start off. The other thing is, if you're just starting with different habits, there's many things like if you can cue yourself, make your environment, because it's not something you typically do. You have something that kind of alerts you that where in your environment where you are at. If you want to do is make it something attractive, make it easy. You don't have to do long bouts of it. Usually you can start with just as little as 2 to 5 minutes on something. Remember, when you're starting, if we're going into habits now, if you're starting a habit, it's not how long you do the habit, but how many reps that you do in the habit. This is a lot of these principles. I want to credit this person, Atomic Habits. I believe his name is Thomas Clear. I hopefully, I know it's Clear, his last name, but that a lot of the points that I'm bringing up right now are from there. So I want to give him credit where credit is due. So making it obvious, making it easy, and that way you're not spending a lot of time. And by getting those reps in, you will be more likely to keep engaging those behaviors. And then he has 2 kind of follow-up ways. He calls it the 2-minute rule. And that kind of goes back to the repetitions is much more important than the amount of time that you're spending to sear the habit into the head. And the other one is try not to miss twice. If you've set up a certain kind of thing for you, if you miss one time, don't beat yourself up, because the judge is not going to help you in that way. In fact, the inner critic is most likely to sabotage most of our behaviors that we want to be consistent within. So you just want to create some simple rules that make it easier for you, so you're not having to always make all these kind of decisions, and allows you to kind of be more likely to engage in behaviors that you will find oftentimes fun. And like I said, it doesn't always have to lead to something long-term. Just by engaging in what you interest, you'll discover things that you never knew about yourself and have a lot of fun on the way.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Michael.
Sure.
I am a bit of a habit geek, and there's a tech tool that I use that I wanted to share. It's an app called Momentum, but there are other similar ones.
Cool.
And the idea is you essentially list out the habits that you're going to do, and then every day you just check the ones that you do at the end of the day. And it helps reinforce this repetition idea. And the way I've engaged with it, I'm aware of the Atomic Habits book. It's actually something I'm reading now. But even before that, I definitely found this. I would give myself a check for this habit, even if I did it just for 30 seconds.
Perfect.
Because it was like, it's like I didn't have all the time, but I did sit down and read a book for just a very, very short amount of time. And that was like my reading habit for the day.
Correct.
And I found this thing, it's, you're not really getting this reward system of just checking an app. There's not, there's not really much of that, but I did feel a sense of progress, watching, wow, I'm really doing these things, and and seeing them out that you do them over time. I think it's helped me build good habits.
Correct.
So, yeah, sometimes these tech tools can help in the process. There's definitely both sides to the different applications we have available to us.
Well, that's the thing you and I have been really interested in, is how, obviously tech is not going to slow down. It's going to continue to just kind of grow and grow and grow. And how do we, and it's being driven, of course, by our own minds, and how to do that in a way that actually enhances the well-being of our lives and mitigating the side effects that these powerful tools have. And I think that's where the two of us can have some very interesting conversations, where we can see how can we use technology to really improve our well-being, and what are some of the pitfalls and side effects that we can do, and how we can mitigate those. So I'm excited to have those conversations.
Yeah, certainly. It's kind of like a microcosm of everyone, right? As a society, we don't know how to use these tools in the best ways yet. And so we figure them out for ourselves. And maybe conversations like these, are, small part of society is figuring it out on the fly and comparing notes.
That's the way we're going to go. We're going to explore it, and let's have some fun with it.
Well, Dr. Mantz, it's been a wonderful conversation.
Likewise, Jim.
Yep. Let's wrap it up and see you next time.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.